Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, agents. I'm Manny Carl, and welcome to a Division News Break. And today we are covering the PTS Week 3, and we're going to go ahead and review that and give you a little preview of the things to come. There will be a complete set of patch notes, but it will be deployed February 2nd, which is actually tomorrow. I'm not sure if it's going to be, actually tonight is maintenance night. So sometime tonight, PTS 3 will be out, and so they're going to have a full set of patch notes, and we'll cover that once they come out. But we're going to go ahead and cover some of the more important aspects of it. Before I actually talk about that, you thought I was just going to dive into the news. Let's go ahead and talk about my last video, because some people really didn't like it when I called somebody out. They said I was trashing somebody that remained nameless, and I'll keep that remain nameless. I was not trashing this guy. What I was doing was calling out the fact that he was bragging on Twitter about using this exploit and spawn killing people and spawn trapping people into it. Yes, he made a great video. I'm not denying he makes great videos. Please stop saying that I'm saying that he's making bad videos, because he's not. He makes good videos, he makes good points, and he definitely does them in a high quality fashion. And also, yes, he was an ETF member for the first set. I don't care. It doesn't really matter to me. That's not something that I'm like, whoa, hey, ETF member, I better lay off. No, I'm not gonna pull any punches for anybody. If I need to call it out, I'm gonna call it out. There's nothing, and I'm not gonna mention your name unless I'll keep the names away from this, because it doesn't matter who it is or what it is. I've done it before in the past, and I don't need to call out names, because what I'm doing is expressing my opinion, and the person who did it has nothing to do with it. It's the actions that speak, and I don't need to call out the names. That's really what it is. And so, in the people I've talked with about it, if I've talked with you about it, I sincerely apologized unless you were a dick to me over general messaging, and you know who you are. You know who you are being a dick. And that's really what it comes down to, is I will use your name if you're being a dick to me, and that's really what it is. But I don't give a shit about any of this, really, because it's week 3 PTS, and we're getting really close to the final PTS week. I have no idea when the final PTS week is, but let's go ahead and dive into the changes that they're doing, because that is what's really important. That is what's making the game. Yes, the video that he made actually made a difference, so who cares about it? It made a difference. It made changes. They made changes to the stuff in the PTS. And also, big ups to Upper Echelon Gaming. I commend them for their video. I was actually in the middle of thinking about doing a video for exactly what they basically called out, and that is PTS is not a friggin' free preview for people. Like, you don't get that in addition. It's not a preview build. It is a test build. People are testing the server. So if there's something in there, like, this isn't a competitive version of the game. Like, it's in there to test. Like, there are people out there that are running the meta that comes out, or they're doing whatever, and they have to win at all costs. That's not what this is about. When the regular game comes out, when that releases, then sure, yes, go ahead, run the meta all you can. This is about testing out the builds, and if you're continually testing out the builds that have already been tested out and the stuff that Massive already knows about, you're not helping anybody. We're trying to help. And I am taking the Upper Echelon pledge right now, and I will not run the meta. I am not running the meta right now. I'm not running the meta in the future, so I will not run the meta. I will not utilize builds that give me an upper hand just so that I can win and look good in the videos. I die a lot because I use these crappy builds, and I'm just trying to test out as much as possible. So, with that said, be like, I use the hashtag on Twitter, hashtag #RiseUp, because that's what we need to do. We need to set a higher standard, and Upper Echelon, I could not think of a better name for creating that standard. So big mad ups to you for taking that and calling that out, because this isn't a preview build. This isn't, something that you can use to get your stature up or anything like that. People need to understand these are test builds, and that's it. Now that I've spent 4 minutes explaining stuff that I didn't need to explain, let's dive into the PTS 3 main changes that are going. And PTS 3 is in the works and will be deployed probably tomorrow. A complete patch notes will be published when all changes are made. But until then, I thought that it might be interesting to share some of the learnings from PTS 2 that Massive has basically divulged for us. So let's go ahead, start off with number 1, reloading while sprinting. They did an experiment in PTS2 while slowing the player if the reloads while sprinting and interrupting reloads if it starts sprinting. The purpose was to make sure that the rhythm of combat where the player has to consider that he or she will be more vulnerable. And as sprinting makes you, a lot harder to hit, that is, this was meant to encourage cover use in longer range combat. And what they saw was that it created too big of a change in the feel of the game that players have grown accustomed to, especially in PvE. It also needed some more work and, smoothing out and supported in all cases. To that effect, they have removed the restriction for the next PTS phase, and you can again reload while sprinting. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this just for a second. I thought that this was a great mechanic. I thought slowing it down while sprinting and reloading was great. However, the stopping the reloading while you went sprinting was absolutely terrible, because a lot of times you reload and then you sprint and it stops you from reloading. And I think if they just do the slowdown while reloading, I think that will fix the main thing. So if you're listening to this, Ubisoft, I loved this. Please add in just the reload while sprinting slowing down. Don't add the interruption of the reload when you reload and then start sprinting. So I thought it was a great mechanic. I think it's great because it makes it so that while you're chasing rogues, they have to slow down to reload or something like that. It gives you much more viable options for chasing them down, and they're going to have a little bit more to think about when they're doing it. So normalization issues. Their very first attempt at normalizations was largely successful in creating a more balanced and equal PvP situation in the Last Stand game mode, reducing the impact of min-maxed gear while achieving the time to kill and time to be killed that they were looking for. However, some of the changes that were made with the method of the next phase of testing will be changed. As the major bonuses on gear have been adjusted, they feel more comfortable letting them have an impact on the Last Stand game mode balance, and so they will not be scaling them down as aggressively as before. They have adjusted how they normalize armor and mitigation to even out the damage effectiveness of guns versus skills. Generally speaking, guns did the right amount of damage, but skills did a little too much on PTS2 Last Stand. They are looking forward to feedback on these changes in the next phase of the PTS. So, week 3, get your feedback out as to whether or not you think that the balance is okay. I thought that in the PTS2, a lot of the games that I played, the abilities were pretty good. I did feel that the skill power meta was definitely much higher, but I didn't see it as much as I still saw a lot of people running. I think that a lot of people ran skill builds because their normal tanking and doing the blind hip firing was actually taken away. So I think that they did that. So they went ahead and they took a look at the skill power meta, and they saw that the pendulum shifted very quickly to builds focusing on electronics and skill power, and they were being very dominant in PTS2. This was a result of the revamp of how skill power scales, and they removed the diminishing returns and made investing heavily into the niche payoff. So they're happy to see skill builds come back to life, but the goal was to have a large amount of different builds and playstyles available and viable for the Last Stand. So they're going to be making a few adjustments, so let's go ahead and cover those adjustments right now. Cooldowns and power of skill. To make sure that the other types of builds are more viable again, they're going to be making cooldowns on low skill power a little shorter than they were on the PTS2, allowing DPS balanced and tank builds more frequent access to their tools. They've also made it so that the skill power does not lower cooldowns as much as it did, meaning that they didn't quite reach where they were trying to go with the skill cooldown at high power levels as they were in PTS2. So they've made those adjustments to haste to rein in what was possible to achieve in terms of a super fast cooldown, so look for that to be a factor. So more details to come in the patch notes, but they're looking forward to seeing how these adjustments feel to the player in PTS3. Support station range and overlap. There was a lot of complaints I saw about support station, and the support station became quite strong with the new skill power and gained a lot of utility with the revamp of Reclaimer. On PTS2, they tried different range settings for it. This, however, turned out to be so small that it frustrated solo players relying on their support station, restricting them to much slower movements. And if they just increased the skill power of the basically the performance mod that gave it a larger range, just make that huger and make it so that if you do want to spec into support station, that these gave you the right amount of range that it would. So to that effect, they're going to be increasing the base range again and adjusting the bonus for Reclaimer down a little instead to reduce the difference between the two versions. Furthermore, to make sure that they don't get super groups stacking multiple support stations for very large healing efficiency, they're adding a system to prevent overlapping stations to heal the same player. So there you have it. They're thinking about those things. So countering skill objects, and this is something I talked about. They observed that some skill objects such as support stations, seeker mines, and turrets were too difficult to counter. They are making sure that they are more vulnerable to elemental damage such as explosions and fire. It doesn't mean that they'll be super squishy, it just means that they'll react more predictably to those effects. As requested by so many, they're making Disruptor Sticky Bomb detonate on impact to be easier to hit skill objects such as seeker mines with. So that's great. They definitely got my vote for that change. Because I definitely like the Disruptor Sticky Bomb, and I think that it should send out like an EMP pulse that disables turrets and sticky mines and all that stuff. So Seeker Mines, the cluster variety of Seeker Mines, was used a lot in PTS 2, and they believe that fair trade-off for getting the multiple Seeker Mines was removing the Stagger. As this is one of my suggestions. I don't know anybody else if they suggested it. I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I said in one of the requests that the Seeker Mine needs to remove the Stagger and keep the damage, and that's what's going to happen. So they're going to go ahead and remove the Stagger effect on the Seeker Mines and keep the damage, and they're going to give it a little cooldown boost as well. So that'll be go ahead, and they've also will be moved from the initial explosion to the bleed effect afterwards. So they're going to go ahead and keep that. So turrets, similar to Seeker Mine, the turret could become a bit too powerful with high skill power builds to the point where it was almost invulnerable in PvP. So they're going to make a few adjustments to reducing its range, but preserve the damage output to make sure it keeps its role as a side damage companion when used with the proper positioning rather than a long range damage beast. And I think that this might be good. It's not probably going to be that great. I think it should be mainly effective with the flame build. If you're using the Fire Crest, I think that that's where the range should come in. So if you're using Fire Crest, I really think that a lot of these skills need to be tied to the actual gear set that they're to actually make them more viable. And so let's go ahead and start looking at some of the weapon changes. The Historian was meant to allow a new type of playstyle based with skill power. It was an experiment testing the boundaries of what the pros and cons of certain builds would be. With that, they observed, though, that this was completely removing challenge of skill builds, giving them a great weapon to use while having to invest nothing into other stats other than skill power focused ones. The Historian is now changed to be a weapon centered around the firearm stat, a place where damage scaling with your build investment feels more natural. The Caduceus was meant to create a low-grade sustained healing roll, useful for situations where you have a constant low-grade damage. A few adjustments will be made to make sure that it fills that role and isn't being abused. It will receive a cooldown on how often it can hit each player to prevent a group to stack multiple users on the Caduceus, creating too much healing per second. Secondly, it was being used predominantly to sustain by almost every type of build, making it dangerously close to a must pick, something we want to avoid to that effect, and the healing amount now scales with skill power, putting the weapon in a support player niche. Now, I went ahead and did my review on this, and so it really is, and I just skipped over this because I didn't want to put this out there and create something that it was not intended for, where a group of people were just using Caduceus to just go ahead and heal and pick each other up, and it was already out there. So there was a purpose to why I wasn't showing it in a build and using it just as a gun for a solo player. So survivability, they added base health on PTS 2. They revamped how health works. There are answers in their FAQ, so you can go take a look at that. While the reduced health amounts on major bonuses were good for build diversity, they felt that it should go a little higher with the base health that the player has in the end game, and have increased that by about 30%. 7%. Medkits gained utility around the PTS-1 in that they can cleanse status effect. On the other hand, they also lost a little utility since they could no longer overheal. This was done to equalize the length of PvP encounters and address situations where the user sustained through PvE encounters using med packs without having to think about cover tactics. They did want to try out reducing the cooldown on medkits again, since they suspect that the changes even out in themselves and do not perhaps require a longer cooldown after all. Now, this is going to be a change that's going to be a little difficult for some people to handle. Now, the Seeker gear set, let's talk about that. After they tried out 2 versions of the gear set and evaluating the player feedback as well as the statistics, they've decided not to release the Seeker gear set in its current form. And if the effect wasn't unique enough, it's clear, the use wasn't clear enough for players, and it wasn't quite fun enough to play with, and it was removed from the PTS-3. Now, I'm going to go ahead and step back here really quick. I thought it was a blast to play with. It provided a good amount of DPS for people who were basically using it as an assault class. However, I did feel that the name Seeker gear set was a little bit off on what the talents were, and I think those could be revamped. And I definitely am looking forward to making a video next on how to create a Seeker gear set as well as a Midas weapon that will be happy for everybody to use. So let's go ahead. We'll talk about Legendary, and then we'll just see the patch notes tomorrow. Legendary mode was a bit less in the spotlight because Last Stand was so prevalent, and they did get a lot of good feedback on it. One of the main concerns, however, was that it was often deemed too punishing due to the lack of checkpoints, especially for a group dying in the last encounter. There will be now 1 checkpoint in the Legendary mission. However, in order to preserve some level of punishing aspect of late wiping, the checkpoint is added approximately halfway through the mission. There are some, the main learning and change. These are just some of the main learning changes for PTS-3. And that they got from PTS2, and they hope that a lot of this is going to address the main feedback and concerns that they've received from everybody in the second and first phases of PTS. Once again, the feedback is crucial to shaping how this update is, and so they hope that we'll do the same level of investment with the next phase. I expressly encourage every single person out there to go ahead and hit the forums and report everything, give your feedback on everything, how you like it, how it feels, whether it's good, whether it's bad, especially if you like it. Because a lot of the changes are made upon the negative reactions that people have, whether they don't like something. There's not a whole lot in here about how they got great feedback and decided not to change it. So let's go ahead and try to put as much positive feedback on the things that we like. That way we can get our voices heard if something is great. I thought the Seeker gear set was great. I didn't say anything about it. I regret that, so that's on me. So I believe that everybody needs to do that. So anyways, that's my time. This has gone on long enough. Anyways, so thank you so much for watching this. If you like this video, go ahead and drop a like and subscribe to our channel for more information. We're going to have those patch notes for you tomorrow, and we'll do a review of them and kind of talk about them. And so I'm looking, it doesn't sound like this is going to be the last PTS, so look for another week of PTS next month, or actually today's February 1st, so next week will be another PTS go around, so look for that. So thank you all for watching. For all of us here at the Division News Break, I'm Manny Carl, and we'll see you in the Last Stand and Legendary mode and whatever other modes that we can possibly go through in this next week. Thank you so much for watching. Agent out.